I like to tell people that about 50% of what happens that we experience as like a positive or a negative thing is actually just happening inside of our head and has nothing to do with the outside world.
This idea of agency is so important, and I think it plays into to maybe start to move the conversation to the work we do as well. It plays into this, what I'm seeing is like a need that companies want for people to have more self-leadership, right? To take more initiative and to drive impact on their own.
Anything we think we want to teach, just have them do it. Don't talk about doing it, just do it.
I think it's terribly important to insist on individual values.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Initiative, creation, all these things which we value. It's now possible to make organizations on a larger scale than was ever possible before.
Learning Culture Podcast.
Teach people to analyze the kind of things that are said to them.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Learning Culture Podcast. I am your host, Andrew Barry, and this is a show about building cultures of learning inside companies. Joining me this week is Ryan Giordano. Ryan is the Director of Talent Development at Fleetio. And this conversation is one that I thoroughly enjoyed because it's about a topic that's very important for me and also for Ryan. And that is the topic of emotional intelligence and how that can be an antidote to the burnout that we all know is real in the workplace. And in this conversation, we unpack Ryan's own experience with burnout, how he reached breaking point and wanted to quit his job immediately, how his manager intervened and saved him, and what he learned from that whole process. The idea of emotional intelligence is one that is understood at the surface level, but in this conversation, we go much deeper into a specific aspect of emotional intelligence. And it's the aspect of reframing as an emotional intelligence tool. So the core belief here that Ryan shares is that people massively underestimate the control they have of their own experience. And we unpack what that looks like with practical exercises and a really helpful window metaphor that I think you'll find if you are new to the world of self-awareness, mindfulness, meditation. I think this metaphor is a great way to a perspective on these things. We also talk about how we all see the world differently. We have selective attention, and we all create meaning based on what we see, and how that reality impacts so much of our communication. And so we talk about some of the ways that we can overcome this so that we can bridge the gap in communication that I think so many people see in their teams. Ryan also shares about the coaching circles programs that he's been running at Fleetio, which have been massively successful. And we get really practical. We talk about how to shift from this sort of concept heavy stuff that it sounds like we spend most of the conversation on, and get to like immediate application. And I think you're going to find that extremely valuable towards the end of this conversation. So with that, please sit back, relax, and enjoy my episode with Ryan Giordano. Ryan, welcome to the show.
Oh, so happy to be here. Thanks for having me. Excited to take one of our conversations into the rest of the world.
Yeah, I feel like I say that every time now. It's great because we've had a good few. We met in person in San Francisco as well, and now we're going to get to unpack something that you and I have touched on, and it's something very close to your heart. And let's start there, right? You went through a burnout. I've had my own experience with this. A lot of people listening probably have as well, but you went through a burnout experience, which led you down a path of meditation and mindfulness. And we're going to get into some of those things later on, but tell us about that experience.
Yeah. I mean, where to begin? I'm sure many people can relate, although I find the more I talk about it, the more people start to wonder like what stage they're at, because there are kind of stages to burnout and that experience. And so I think last time we spoke, I shared that I had actually given like a keynote presentation to a big organization on this and tried to break apart like what are the pieces of it. But in my own personal experience, it really snuck up on me. I think especially in the type of working world that we have today, we can normalize a lot of the feelings that might actually be associated with burnout, being tired at the end of the day, wanting to just kind of numb yourself with TV or food or something like that. And so in a lot of ways, it kind of snuck up on me. I thought I was just working a lot. And I think one of the standout moments for me was pretty far into this. I was working at a company full time in person, but we were allowed to kind of call our own shots and work from home every so often. And I started doing that more and more. And, you know, I don't know, it was far enough in the future. I could now admit like days where I legitimately felt sick, but I think I tried to pass it off as if I think I have a cold, but I was having like either, stomach issues or something else that was not a cold, but it was my body trying to tell me you're in trouble. And it wasn't actually until a coworker pointed that out to me that I really started to notice what was going on and make that
Mm-hmm.
change. Yeah.
And can you pay a little bit more about what was going on at the time? Like just like what are we talking about? How hard were you working? What was the stress that you were going through? Yeah.
See, I don't even want to oversell this. I don't think I was working that crazy hard. It's not one of those crazy Silicon Valley stories of working 80-hour weeks or anything like that. It's just that you're always on. And yeah, and I think so what this comes down to is you could be working a not crazy amount of hours, but still just be on. And by on, I mean you're giving 100, if not 110% of your energy to your job. And that can happen a lot to people who are what we call people pleasers, but that's kind of a negative way to look at it. But people who are really attentive, and this kind of gets at the subject of emotional intelligence. It's not to say that, yeah, I guess maybe it is to say that people who are highly emotionally intelligent and don't know how to manage that intelligence are going to be just drained constantly if they're spending a lot of time around people. And so it had more to do with that. I do a lot of training and in-person programs. There was a lot of stress and anxiety as the company was scaling rapidly, which is a normal challenge. And so it's more that there was never really a break. And even if I took a vacation, as many people know in this industry, you go away and you come back and the work's just sitting there, hi, I'm still here. And so you got to keep going. Yeah. So it comes down to, and I think we'll get here and maybe you'll lead me there, but it came down to getting so bad. And I can talk about like the breaking point, but eventually what you come to find out is you can't repair that with a vacation here and there. You can't repair that with like taking off an hour early to go for a run. It's a practice you need to build into your life to try to manage that happening.
Let's talk about that breaking moment. When did you realize you had to make a change?
It's dramatic, and I guess I'm a little shy about it more than I realize. But I've talked about this publicly and written about it, so I'm happy to share. So the gist is that I mean, obviously there's more to this story, and there's a lot of buildup. But pretend you got a little bit of buildup to this. There was a moment where, probably after feeling this way for weeks and having coworkers notice that I was like sick or working from home more often, I left home one day having decided to quit when I got to work, and I walked into the office. And at the time, maybe this is part of the symptom, I didn't have a direct, I was reporting up to an executive who had left the company. And we were kind of, as a placeholder, I was reporting to someone this was not their function to be responsible for. But it was a great guy and mentor. And I went to him and I just said, hey, I don't think I can do this anymore. And I'm done. And part of my story, and that I like to tell people, it's not always our responsibility to save people, but when you can, it's really helpful. And what this person said in that moment was really powerful and helped put me on the right path, because in that moment, he said, if you're really not feeling as well as you're describing, then I don't think, he didn't want to tell me what to do, but he basically said, you're probably not in a position to make such a big decision. And he said, would you be willing to take some time off to think about it before you like leave the company? And in a way, I felt like that was a lot of like tender care with some also like professional guidance to say like, hey, you might just be in a funk right now. And I didn't fully recognize it. And I didn't take that he was downplaying it. He was just saying, if you're not in a good mental space, maybe you want to think about it before you make a big decision like quitting a job. And long story short, I ended up taking medical leave. I didn't know, I was going to skip past this part, but it's actually a good PSA. I didn't know that medical leave, I feel so silly about this, but up until the age of like 28 or so, maybe even longer, I thought medical leave was for breaking your leg or getting surgery. And I didn't realize, I was raised by two therapists in the Bay Area here, and I still didn't realize that like mental health challenges could actually qualify as real reasons to take medical leave and recover. So that was another big lesson for me.
Yeah, that is really good for anybody listening as well. I feel like a big part of what you described, like you said, it wasn't like you weren't doing the 996 like crazy Silicon Valley thing, but you were basically, like you said, everything revolved around your job. So it was all external, right? All your energy and focus and all that was external. And what's interesting to me, when you described like the path to salvation, it's, I've got this little Buddha on my desk here to remind me of this, and it's sort of very close to my own journey, that you looked at inner work and reflection. And you mentioned this window metaphor. Could you elaborate on that? And maybe you want to work up to that as well. Maybe that's jumping ahead a bit, but that does sound like a big kind of key to solving this for you.
Yeah, I love that. So first of all, I'll share a couple things. So one of my frameworks kind of leading us to where we're going here. Something I realized, and I don't know if this is an exact enumeration, but I like to tell people that about 50% of what happens that we experience as like a positive or a negative thing is actually just happening inside of our head and has nothing to do with the outside world. And then maybe about 50% is on the outside. That's just a rough estimate, but it's a really helpful way to remind people that you have control over your own experience. I think it's so common, and most of us have this experience every day where you're driving and someone cuts you off in traffic and you go, they made me mad. What did they do to make me mad now? And it's a really powerful revelation. It's not easily done, but through meditation, mindfulness, other great practices out there, people often have to mentor or guide someone to get to this point, or you can listen to audio, but someone can help walk you through the experience of. There's a series of exercises you can do over time to build the muscle memory and start to realize in those moments you can actually catch yourself and go, sure, they did something, but did they make me mad, or am I feeling mad now? And do I want to identify with that, or I just want to like let this go? There's a really powerful teacher I listen to, is also a podcaster named Sam Harris, and he teaches mindfulness practices. And one of the things he likes to point out to people is that, and I'll point this out to you now, Andrew, if it's not familiar, like every feeling you've ever felt, good or bad, like the worst pain you've ever felt, the saddest sadness you've ever felt, the brightest joy, it's all come and gone. And so while that's both sad, it's also an opportunity to recognize that anytime you're feeling something that's you want to avoid, you can also pretty quickly recognize that there will be a moment when that feeling is gone. And so that's a part of that. And I'll check in with you, and then we can keep going towards the window.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. I've also been thinking about a lot, is the half-life of a feeling. It's actually
Yes.
way, way shorter than you think. And if you, and so much of, I know if I speak from experience, like so much of my suffering comes from avoiding the feeling of feeling the feeling.
Yes.
And I think that's also a big part of meditation and mindfulness, is to know that if you actually lean into and feel that feeling fully, it doesn't last very long. It passes through you, and like you said, it's you didn't say this, but I think it's also it teaches you something. It's a signal, it's a sign, right? And so part of meditation and mindfulness is learning to pay attention to that.
I 100% agree. And I would, just so we're tying threads together here, earlier I mentioned part of the early phases of burnout being like, it's exactly as you describe. It's that you start to create suffering as you're trying to get away from a negative feeling. And so when I talked about like numbing with TV or food, or I mean, people do it with shopping, drugs, social time, exercise. I mean, exercise is a healthy form of numbing, but also if you go for a run every day and you never stop and like let yourself just feel, you're still not handling things. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm going to put a link in the show notes. There's some really good stuff here. You probably have a ton of stuff as well. We should compare notes before, but just little exercises for people. You sort of touched on this earlier, like that you can do to even just questions to really sit with and ask yourself, like what is the feeling you're not feeling now? Like examples like that. Let's go to the window metaphor, because I think that's a really helpful way to explain this to people.
Sure. Yeah. So I tried to lay a little bit of the groundwork there, because what the big revelation here is, and I'm a pretty like analytical guy. I've gone to meditation retreats and I'm the one in the corner asking too many questions. And eventually they tell me, why don't you go sit down and just keep meditating? But I want to know what's happening and what's working. And so maybe to the advantage of the listeners, I'll try to share what I think I know. Not that I've got it all figured out. So I tried to lay the foundation that a lot of what can be revealed by building these practices and building this muscle memory and opening these neural pathways for yourself through repetition, you start to realize how much of what we take as something happening to us is actually something that we just feel or observe or sense, and then we identify with it. And those are two separate steps. So that's really the difference there, is that if I spill my coffee and I go, oh, I'm an idiot, like those are actually two steps. But a lot of people go, I spilled the coffee because I'm an idiot. And that's the connection they make. And now they are assigning blame or things like that. So the idea behind the window, it's actually a metaphor in a way. So if you were to imagine to go stand by a window, I've got one over here to the right. Most people spend their whole life looking out the window, and most windows, if they're clean enough, are transparent. And so you're looking through them. And many people will never in their whole lives notice that, and this is both a metaphor and literal, that if you look closely at the glass, you can see a reflection, and it's reflecting back something to you. And so my kind of baseline for this concept of window is that most of us spend our whole lives looking out the window and looking at all the things happening, and that's kind of just letting life happen to you and identifying with it. But we can take a moment and what some might call introspection. You called it kind of asking, or even some people use the word interrogating, which might sound more violent than it means to, but interrogating your own experience. Why am I feeling this way? Where does this come from? What happens when it fades away? And so the window is just a metaphor for the fact that most of us are always looking outward and not noticing that we're looking through something, that we're processing the world through something.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really helpful, and it introduces that sort of duality, like you said. There are sort of two levels to look at everything, and I also like the way you tease apart the two steps. I think that was also a big unlock for me. One of the things I still struggle with, though, is explaining to people that, it's so easy to go, but that person did this egregious, outrageous thing. Like, how could I not feel like that, right? And that's valid. What do you say to that kind of objection?
Oh man, we could go for a while. So I'll put I'll plant two flags in the ground and let you kind of choose where you want to go. One is a one is a really deep conversation about free will and whether or not we believe people have control over who they are. And I'll give you the short version of that, which is I didn't choose my genetics. I didn't choose the parents that raised me. I didn't choose to be born in the country or the social class I was born into. I didn't choose my race. All those things were just assigned to me outside of my choice. But often people, especially in Silicon Valley, will say, I'm a self-made person. I'm a self-made man. I did this. And they'll never acknowledge that they didn't randomly get born in a different country or into a different social class or without resources. And so without getting into a whole debate around free will, I still think it's easy to admit that, like, so again, I'll use my driving metaphor. Someone cuts out, they blow a red light and they cut out in front of me, and I'm going, what the heck? I'm stressed out. Maybe I'm going on a date and I'm trying to like drive carefully and gently for somebody, and suddenly it's like this crazy situation. I'm not always perfect at this, but when done right, I recognize that one, I feel a certain way. It's not that person made me feel a way, which we covered earlier. And then the second piece is that person didn't choose to be who they are. I don't know what's going on. Maybe they're running late. Maybe they got an emergency, but they didn't choose to be the way that they are. It just kind of happened to them. And so, again, we assign meaning, and that's that half thing too. We assign meaning not only to ourselves. We associate with things. I spilled the coffee, I'm an idiot, but we associate with the other half, which is that person cut me off. They're an idiot. They're a jerk. And so in both cases, there's a two-step of like, they just cut you off. Now you're assigning the value and meaning to it.
Yeah, and I feel like an important part of this to bring into here is all of our default tendency to judge, right? That's just like that is hardwired, right? So we look to assign blame. We look to find cause and effect. Like, it's how our brains are wired. And what makes this complicated is that it's never as black and white or as binary as that. And it's this idea of like two things can be true, right? Which is so hard to. You look at the public discourse now, like the way how polarized it. Like you can see that this is a very difficult thing for people to get comfortable with. And like in the case of that cutting off, like it's true that this person did that and caused a stressful situation for you, which you reacted to somewhat out of your control. And then it's also true that that person may have a sick child that needs to get to the emergency room and needed to do that. And that's a really difficult, to hold those two things in your mind is really difficult. I don't really have a question there. What do you want to say on top of that?
Yeah, I've got a little more for you. So you may be familiar with, and some listeners may be familiar with a word or phrase called metta, and it's a type of mindfulness meditation that basically instructs or it causes a person to specifically focus on cultivating the sense of compassion for other people without judgment. And so in the same way that I might sit and practice paying attention to my breathing to build the muscle memory of like being present in the moment, you could actually sit and instead of focusing on your breathing, you can cultivate the feeling of, I usually start with my dog because she's the easiest one to feel only compassion for. There's nothing to feel any, even with family and friends, you might go, well, I love you, but you got me that one time. But if you could start with if you could start with something that you love, like just unquestionably, and notice what that feels like. And so you're actually paying attention to not just the thoughts and daydreaming about, oh, I love my dog, I want to go on a walk, but you notice like, oh, my heart actually feels warmer or opens up or whatever you feel. And then you try to keep that feeling going, almost as if you sparked a fire or something inside yourself. Now you're kind of blowing on the embers and you're going, okay, if I love my dog that much, can I love, my friend who, is always there for me? And, can I love my mother? And of course you can. And you just keep kind of expanding that feeling. And what some people will try to do is then shift from people that they know they love and it's easy to feel the love for, to strangers. And then from strangers to people who've done them wrong. And that's a big ask. And I wouldn't just sit you down and say, forgive the person who wronged you the worst in your life. But um, the point is that it's available to you and it's possible. And a lot of people just don't even ever open that door to see what that's all about. And I find it's saved me from so many situations where I could have, a previous me would have exploded or gotten really frustrated and ruined myself and other people's day.
Yeah. Yeah. This reminds me, I'm looking over our notes here. You've shared with me your core belief is that people massively underestimate how much they control within their own experience. And we've sort of touched on that here. And
Yeah.
this idea of agency is so important. And I think it plays into, to maybe start to move the conversation to the work we do as well. It plays into this, what I'm seeing is like a need at companies, a want for people to have more self-leadership, right? To take more initiative and to drive impact on their own. And I think you and I both agree that we underestimate that capability. And like you said, it's available to you, right? It doesn't mean that you should always just. It doesn't mean you should, like, you can expose yourself to a lot of hurt if you go into the world like that exclusively. But the fact that it's available to you is often like a complete unknown to people, an unknown, right? And then once you start to think about this, it opens up a world of possibilities. Because to bring this back to what we were talking about earlier, 50% of what our experience is happening outside us, 50% is in our head, like you said earlier, in these stories we tell ourselves, right? And if we can accept that there are stories that we tell ourselves that are informing our reality, we can change those stories.
Correct.
And that's what this agency is. That's what where we underestimate our ability. So
Yes.
to make this concrete for people, could you think of a time where you have been able to reframe an experience or an event, and it's resulted in it's unlocked something for you?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this comes up a lot. I'll give two quick examples that may not be exactly what you're looking for, but I think they demonstrate the point. So I've got this muscle memory built in because I've been practicing it for a bit. And so one of the times I first experienced it was actually really early. I was still recovering from burnout. It was early COVID, but because we were all locked inside, I've been practicing a bunch. And I actually got a phone call from a friend, and I was with my partner at the time and our dog, and we got this phone call from like this other couple who we knew were getting a puppy, and they called, and we answered the phone. We're on speaker. How's the puppy? And the woman in the couple is crying. She's sobbing, and my head leapt to something happened and the dog is gone. Like the dog is dead and something's happened, because I couldn't think of why else she was crying. And then I quickly captured myself and said, hang on, like, we don't know what's going on yet. Like, let's listen. And so we said, what's going on? And, sure enough, something had happened, that the dog had been injured and broken its leg. But then oddly, like, everyone else in the situation seemed to feel like this was the worst possible thing, but I had already leapt to a worse thing. And so suddenly I'm the one in the group going, hey, it's all good. Like, it just broke its leg. Like, it could be worse. And I think people we say that to each other in society. And we don't like respect the gravity of what they're saying. You think someone's like trying to be complacent and just say, like, it's all good. It's all good. But in reality, like, it could be worse. And I think it feels counterintuitive to think about how things could be worse, but it's actually a really healthy exercise because it reminds you to just like ground yourself in what is. So that's one. I'll give you a work one too if you want.
Yeah. I want to hear that. I want to bookmark something here, because perspective, like, that is another good example of perspective, and how having a different perspective can help soothe the situation? All that. We'll come back to that idea. Let's hear the work story.
Yeah, so work one, I mean, this will surprise nobody, but I'm in a group right now that is tasked with looking into how can we get more AI adoption at our company, and that's a very broad mandate, and that's I don't blame anyone for that. It's a really popular topic right now, and everybody wants to figure out what's hype and what's real, and how can we use it in the way that's real and valuable. And so myself and the head of IT at my company are two people that are pretty heavily involved in trying to figure out how to do this. Because in addition to talent development, I do a lot of like organizational effectiveness type work. How can we effectively use our systems and spread knowledge across the company? And one of the things that we were tasked with early on was trying to figure out like how do we want to position this to the employees and to the staff of my company, Fleetio. And one of the challenges was we legitimately and authentically don't want this to read as your jobs are disappearing or we're replacing you, which are these narratives that are out in pop culture that are scary and potentially real, but that's not what's happening here. And so we had to really think through like a question that I would ask in a coaching situation, which is like, well, what else is true here? And how else, how else could what's another version of this story? And that got us looking at all different types of things from internally, like making the project more exciting to us, because one of the reframes or one of the stories that shifted was not that we have to do this or that it was forced on us, but actually that this is like a career defining opportunity. That the head IT and I talked through how like there were people who were there when the internet was invented, or when cloud became a thing, or when mobile became a thing, and overnight and not really overnight, but people had to quickly shift. And there were people who were in charge of help leading that shift, and that they became people who would then tell that story in future interviews. And so that was one of the ways that I was able to help myself and the head of IT look at our own task as something that not only is going to be fun and engaging for the company, but also rewarding to us. It's not just extra work. It's a new opportunity. So I think that's another great reframe and different way of looking at things.
Yeah, and another good example of a perspective shift. And so I think one of the pushbacks I've heard around this, and I do hear, is like, well, what's like you kind of making this up, right? Like, what's the point of this? Like, this is just you're like, and you could, and like especially with using AI, you could literally make up 1,000 different ways of looking at something and reframing it. Where I push back on that, I say like the differences, and your example is a perfect example of this, is that we all exist in the state of like a healthy forward momentum, right? We don't sit passively and just that's like the dystopian view of the future where we're just like consuming from a screen, right? Like that's not how life works. We all exist with a healthy forward momentum, which manifests as actions, right? We take actions in the real world. We pick up the phone, we call someone, that results in an action, cause, effect. That's how life happens, right? And what perspective shifting does is it opens up new possible actions, right? And then what you said in your example, like it almost inspired the team on this new course of action, right? Could you build on that now? And maybe as we start to shift on like how to catalyze this in a team, right? Because to me, this is a very important skill set, like the ability to look at something from different perspectives to identify your next course of action.
Yeah, so we've talked a lot about perspective. A lot of the ways that I'll position this is as reframing, and I'll teach people reframing as an emotional intelligence skill. So if you were to go look up like what are the subsects of emotional intelligence, I think there's officially like 5 categories, but I've been kind of just instead of breaking it down that way, I've been kind of accruing a series of like what I consider mental frameworks and other tools that kind of make up. If you were to literally have a toolbox of emotional intelligence skills, you could open it up and pull one out. One is reframing, and it's the idea that sometimes I'll actually just, if I'm trying to teach this to a group of people at work, I'll just put them through an exercise. Hey, I'm going to give you a news headline, and I need you all to go into a breakout group and come up with 5 different versions of how this could read and what this means. And, it could be something about, this news about a company doing layoffs. And it's like, is that an opportunity for the people that are getting laid off? Is that a nightmare for them? Does it say good things about the economy? Does it say bad things about the economy? You can come up with all these different ways. And so that's an exercise in kind of open-ended thinking and realizing all the different possibilities. I also want to address what you said, which is like, it's kind of this like, so what question that people have. And I think the so what is, it's very revealing when people ask that question. You're like, yeah, like, aren't you more interested in the fact that like your mind can just change at any point? And wouldn't you want to do that? So
right.
It's important to recognize that one of the best places I think about this is values-based leadership or coaching where I'll be working with someone one-on-one, either through my job or in my past life as a coach, where they're not sure what they want, but they know they want to move forward through some situation. And I'm tempted to go into, well, what are your values here? Because you don't seem to have a clear sense of what action to take. But if we go explore what values matter to you, and there are hundreds of values. I think people often think there's like, if they just rattle them off, they're going to say like trust or happiness. But you can find a list of hundreds of them. Brene Brown's got one on her website, and I'll put people in front of that and say, actually go through and tell me the 5 that feel the most important to you, and then we'll use those as guidance for decisions that they want to make. And people need to recognize that, again, a little PSA here, I used to be really anti-manifesting, and I still am a little unsure about the wooey side of that, but sorry, my dog's doing a lot of scratching over there. But I'm a little nervous about the wooey part. But the part of manifesting that's real is that, like, our brain, I think this is almost common knowledge now, but it's worth saying, our brain doesn't recognize the difference between what we think and what we see. And so if you think about something that you want, it's not that it's going to just magically appear, but you are going to be more likely to notice the pathways that will lead you to that thing. And so that is heavily associated with what you're saying, which is, if you're just unwilling to think about new perspectives or reframe things, then you're only going to see the path that is, this is the worst. Everybody's against me in this world. But if you open your mind to different paths and then you actually try to believe in them, then you're more likely to see those things come to life. And so it's self-fulfilling in a weird way.
Yeah. And for anybody who's skeptical about that, go find one of those kind of missing, like, puzzles, like letter scrambles that have words in them, and sit down next to someone else and see what word you see first. And I almost guarantee you it won't be the same as the person next to you. So we all have selective attention, and it's not random, right? We don't walk around randomly seeing things. Like, it's all filtered through our expectations, our goals, our fears. Like, this is a very important point. And I feel like these two things, right? Selective attention, we all see the world differently, and meaning, and the meaning making that we talked about, we all create meaning based on what we see, is a really good, like, way to look at why we have communication problems, why we have the political discourse at the extreme. But let's zero in on a company for a minute. Like, anybody who's worked in a company will know what bad communication looks like, right? When you've got meetings about meetings, and you've got decisions that just drag on forever, or you've got silos where people are not talking to each other in different functions, right? That's in almost every company. This exists. And I kind of want to see if you can help me make this case here, that what we're talking about, this idea of emotional intelligence and this kind of subset of it, this ability to look at different perspectives and reframe things, is actually a tool to improve communication. Do you want to disagree or agree with that?
Yeah, I mean, 100% agree. And I think that a lot of it has to do with, when we talk about emotional intelligence, we're essentially talking about, like, are you aware of, I can use the 50-50 again, are you aware of your own experience as well? I think a lot of people think emotional intelligence actually refers to outside, is, oh, I notice when someone's sad, or I notice when someone's quiet, and I call them out for it. And that's a really useful skill. But the other half is inside. And so a really highly effective emotionally intelligent person is both managing their internal reactions to things. So that might be that we're in a meeting and we're on our way, and I go, oh, Andrew, I hate these meetings. Stacy leads them and she's always so aggressive, or she wastes time, or something like that. Then I'm reinforcing a story for myself, rather than managing my own emotions and going, hey, you're kind of, and I would want to pull up my own reframing tool to catch myself and go, Ryan, you've got a negative perspective on this. Why don't you think about it differently? What's going on in that person's world that they might operate that way? So there's the inside part, and it includes how you lead meetings, how you communicate with people one-on-one or in large group settings. But then there's the outside part as well, which is how you react live. And I get to use this a lot because I'm often face to face with people, either over Zoom or in person. And there is a value to also being able to read the room. I think we all know what it feels like when someone's speaking, and it feels like for some reason or another that they don't seem to understand the feeling or the vibe in the room. And that's really intimidating, when to think that you could be speaking to a group of 20 who you really need to motivate or convince of something. And if a majority of the people in the room are thinking, this person doesn't get what's happening right now, either because of a feeling in the room or literally the tone or the language you're using, it can really hurt your ability to move people and to influence people, especially without authority.
Yes. Yeah. And we could go down an entire rabbit hole on that topic, because it's
Yes.
so important. And I think, I'm going to resist that urge. I want to talk about your coaching circles. So I want to bring that in here as well, maybe as a last point. But I just want to just linger on this for a sec, because I think this is so important. Teaching people to gather different perspectives. Oh, okay, I know what my question was. So you've shared some good examples about how you do this, and you also said earlier, by the way, and this, no one's perfect at this. Everyone, like, we all have our defaults and our assumptions. We all can slip into that, and so this is a practice. This is, and you also said this earlier, right? This is a habit you build over time, and you get better at. Um, but I mentioned this bias to action. Like, how do you, because I feel like this is where people could get stuck as well. You could over index on gathering lots of different perspectives and then never doing anything. How do you make sure you are maintaining a healthy bias for action?
Yeah, so this is really relevant right now. One of the things, so it actually ties to coaching circles as well. So, but I'll just say quickly, coaching circles is a reference to a new project I'm working on at my job, where I take only people managers, people leaders, and I take about 4 or 5 of them, sometimes even less, and we meet in small groups and have open coaching discussions where perhaps I'm coaching someone, but often someone's coaching me, or 2 of them are coaching each other with me observing. And so we're all practicing the skill of coaching and also building emotional intelligence. And one of the things, when you teach someone to coach, you may be familiar with this, Andrew, when you teach someone to coach like right off the bat, and they kind of need like the training wheels or something to help them, you tell them to just keep asking questions. And so the first few weeks, I just gave them a list of questions and said, ask away. And as long as you're not telling people what to do and you're just asking questions, that's building that muscle. And then eventually someone raised their hand, I think from the engineering team, and said, so is this it? Like, what is this coaching? And it wasn't like a negative. I didn't mean like, is this it? But they wanted to know what else is behind this. And I said, what we're actually trying to do, and this is the answer to your question, Andrew, is help develop and build your intuition. And your intuition is your own internal compass, which I think is another thing. Some people wildly trust, almost like in a way that I'm like, how do you trust that so much that you don't check in with people and you lack emotional intelligence? That's like self-awareness. But also some people are so, and I put myself in this category for most of my life, they question their internal compass so much that they say, this must be something that's self-judge or self-critical. When in reality, it's like, what if you're just feeling that something's wrong or that you're not able to say something that you really want to say? And so I've found in the past few years, the more I can trust my intuition or my internal compass, it's leading me to really powerful places. And so I don't know if that's a complete answer to your question, but I think that learning to recognize yourself enough to know I care about what people think, and I've asked enough people that I now can move forward. Versus if you're stuck constantly asking, and you're trying to get 20 people's opinions or 100 people's opinions, you're eventually going to end up with so many that you could never land on one answer. And you might have to also have the self-awareness to recognize this. I'm spinning my wheels here.
Yeah. No, I think that's a really helpful. What I'll add to that as well is to recognize that there's almost nothing you can do that's irreversible or that's final, right? Like and to maybe even extend that further, that, and you kind of touched on this earlier, like the goal, think of your goal with taking an action is to get more feedback, right? Because you cannot operate in an environment without feedback. Like that's primal, right? Like it's how we've evolved as a species. So if you can make that mindset shift as well, and to look for feedback, so put something out there, take some action, like recognize that, and maybe do that analysis of like maybe it was a bit flippant to say nothing is reversible or irreversible. Like maybe there's some things that are, and you need to check that first, but don't let, like, most things aren't, and most things you can take an action and then get feedback and pivot and change and like be in that constant forward motion.
Yeah, we years back, I was working at a company called Blend, and I don't know if it came from our CEO Nima or from somewhere else in the executive team, but we started using this phrase of one-way doors and two-way doors, and it's exactly what you just described. That we would tell people, and I use this everywhere I go now, that an example of a one-way door is telling a customer your price has changed, because it's not irreversible. You can change the price back, but the effect is still out of your control now, because they know that you've just made a decision that affects them, that you can't really say, actually, you didn't mean that. Right. So in a way, it's reversible, but still it's a one-way door, because once you've walked through it, you can't go back in. A two-way door is me telling my company, hey, I'm piloting a new training program and we're going to run it for 2 months. And if we like it, we'll keep going. And if we don't like it, we're going to stop. And that's a two-way door, because I can keep moving one way or another. And so I try to teach people that framework. And you're doing that because you're trying to teach people to actually look for more two-way doors that might feel like one-way doors. but also to be careful. And that drives innovation, because now I'm thinking more about, oh, what can I test without fear of it being wrong? But then you're also teaching some people to watch out for one-way doors, which is like, hey, once you do this, the cat's out of the bag, as it were.
Yeah, yeah, I love that. I love that. Okay, so we've tied. I think we've made a very good case here for emotional intelligence and this ability to reframe different perspectives as a tool for understanding each other better, communicating better. There's a lot more we can say about that, but let's end this with one last question to really ground things for people. Right, we've got tons of other talent development professionals listening to this. What is one thing you've done? I know, and I know you're going to have a good answer to this because we've talked a lot about this, and in coaching circles is one example of something you've experimented with. But what is some way you've made some of what we talked about practical, where you've put it in place for a team, for a group, and you've seen great results?
Yeah, I think that you just said the word that's been probably my word of the year is practical. I just had dinner with a friend, an old coworker last week, and we were both kind of laughing, and I was kind of kicking myself, realizing like how many years I've been in this industry where I've run trainings like this. I spent a bunch of time thinking about like, what are all the concepts? And I basically put up a training that's like, did you know this word means this for that? And you're hoping people will like be inspired and they'll retain this knowledge, and then they'll leave. And then a week later they'll be in a meeting and they'll go, oh, I remember Ryan's slides and I'm going to use it. And I don't know why I thought that was so. I mean, I guess that's how I was trained to do my job for so long. But in the last year, and I've done this my whole career in little bits and pieces, but it's only really struck me that like, why are you doing anything except what's immediately relevant and applicable? And so, for example, yesterday I was running a coaching circle, and this is a small example, but it's a really fun and practical one. And basically, like one of the hard parts about coaching, and I'm sure you know this, is that people will talk too long. You'll say, what do you want coaching on? And they'll spend 5 minutes telling you about a really specific story and who was wearing what coffee they had. And I noticed that the other managers that were practicing coaching were all going, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And so I said, hang on, we got to stop. And we're going to practice intruding and interrupting people right now. And so I went around the room and I had everyone in the group. Each person took a turn talking too long, and each person took a turn having to say, Ryan, I hear you. It sounds like you've got a lot of thoughts on this. What would you like coaching on today? Or I heard you bring up two things. Where do you want to go? And so it was really uncomfortable for people, but they immediately got the value of like, I just practice this now, and I know what it feels like. And so I think your word of practical to me is the answer, which is anything we think we want to teach, just have them do it. Don't talk about doing it. Just do it.
Yeah. I think that's I mean, that is actually just a great way to end it. I think that's
just do it, Nike, baby.
exactly. I'm wondering if I should share this story, but I occasionally attend the public webinars of other training companies to see what others are doing, and I was in one today actually, and it was this elaborate simulation that was created to practice. I won't mention what the skill set is, but. And it just struck me as like, this is so elaborate and has completely lost me. Like, I don't really know what's going on. And instead, why don't we just talk about real things we're all experiencing? Because in this workshops we run, and it sounds like what your coaching circles do, that's where the value is. Where someone says, I just had this problem today. And then someone else goes, oh, I've dealt with that before. This is what I tried and this worked and this didn't. I think we overcomplicated things way too much sometimes in this space.
You bring up an interesting point too, which is one of my rules in these coaching circles, is that it's meant to simulate people sitting in a circle of chairs. And so there's no hot seat. Like if I notice 3 people or even 2 start to say, oh, here's what I do, here's what I do, here's what I do, I go, no. Andrew's not going to remember 7 of us telling him what we would do. Let's all ask Andrew what he wants to do through values coaching or something like that to get him there. I'll give you one more quick story because the interrupting is like a really short-term example of applicability. Here's a much broader one, which still answers the same question, but I think it's relevant to a lot of people. We were about 6 months ago, there's a narrative going around, it's coming from some of the executives at our company, and rightly so, that people who should be really good at strategy were lacking strategic thinking skills. And however, whenever I sat down with one of those execs and said, what do you mean? What does it look like? What are they doing wrong? What are they doing right? Very hard to answer concretely. They could tell really long stories, but they couldn't say Andrew is lacking the ability to A, B, C, and D, so that X, Y, Z. And so we went down a rabbit hole of like, how do we define strategic thinking? What do we want it to be? Do we get everyone to agree on that? And then I run a leadership program here. It's a HiPo leadership program. So we take every 6 months or so, we take 12 individuals from across the company who are either ICs or managers that we think are going to keep moving up in their career here. And we put them in a special program where they got a lot of investment and a lot of time with me. And one of the things that we've been developing over time is that we've done 3 cohorts, and each time we've tried to do strategic thinking, and it's always kind of felt flat because of what you just described. It's a scenario, company X gets this much money, and what should they do with it? And it's like, I don't know. And so this time around, they always have capstone projects in this program as well. And this time around, we brought the two together where we basically said, we're going to teach you strategic thinking halfway through the cohort, and then you're going to use those skills that we teach you to try to lay out your strategy for this like capstone project. And they all had to work on some project that suggested an internal change. And so we actually got to watch them try and sometimes fail. And that's not, that's expected to be strategic, where if you didn't tell people things in advance, if you didn't send pre-reads, if you didn't plan out your timeline, if you didn't think about the impacts on teams, multiple links away from you, you would feel the pain of that. And then they're actually realizing like, oh, that's strategic thinking. I have to know how all these other people are going to feel about what I'm doing right now. So that was a really powerful way to teach something.
Oh, I love that. And that's fully immersive. And I'm going to let this go a little bit further because I want to know, do you think you could extend that, what you just did, to actual projects? In other words, could you say identify an OKR that this team, these 3 teams, product engineering, product marketing, whatever, they're all involved in. Let's find individuals that are on those teams. Let's teach them the skills they're going to need for that project, and then have them apply it in real time to that project. Is that feasible?
Yes, I think so. It depends on how much time you have and what people's kind of cadence of interacting with you are. So what you're describing might be like going to an intact team and actually working with them. One of the like closer examples to that, but it's not quite that I have, is I also run a monthly manager training where managers who, and they're optional but irresistible. So this is not required to attend, but I try to make the content irresistible in the sense that it's so valuable that people just keep coming back. And so that's the bar I hold myself to. And one of the things we do is that we always establish those sessions as we may spend about 10, 15 minutes teaching a topic in the way that's more traditional, but we will always include a session or a component of that session where we're actually applying the skill. And one we've got coming up in October is a strategic thinking one for the managers. And something really cool about that is that I found this really fun. We'll have to come back to this at some point, but it's a really fun metaphor of like a long bridge with a bunch of planks. And that like, if you're not strategically thinking, you're not putting all the planks there, but you're still pointing across the bridge. And there's a group of people saying, I'm not crossing that bridge with you. There's a bunch of gaps in the bridge. And so we're trying to then take that metaphor and say, now go sit in a room and figure out a current project you're working on. And what are the planks that other people might not see that you think are there? And so that's a way we're trying to do that. Yeah.
Love that. That's really good. Ryan, you're a legend. I have to cut this short.
Of course.
At some point, we're going to have to do a round 2.
I love that.
But this was so much fun. Thanks for coming on the show.
Hello. I hope you enjoyed that episode. It's Andrew again with a quick message. If you'd like to support the show, the best way to do that is to leave us ratings and reviews where you listened. If you're on YouTube, hit the like and subscribe buttons and feel free to leave a comment. We love hearing from our listeners and viewers. If you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts, please take the time to give us a rating and leave a review. Once again, we love hearing from our loyal listeners. If you're listening to this on Spotify, please hit the follow button to make sure that you don't miss new episodes as they come out. See you next week for another episode of the Learning Culture Podcast. Thank you for listening.